My name is Jay, and here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need in Israel to succeed, whether that is reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up any kind of conversation, interviews, dates, complaints, arguments, whatever it may be, except here in Israel and in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover, whether we've covered them in the past, whether you'd like a review, whatever you would like. You can always check our previous lessons on youtube.com. Just go to YouTube, type in Cafe Oleh or Nefesh B'Nefesh. You'll see a playlist with all of our previous lessons, along with the vocabulary spreadsheets that I share here on the screen live on Zoom. If you can't follow along, if you'd like to screenshot while I'm teaching live here on Zoom, you're welcome to. Otherwise, the recording will go out in another day or so after class ends, along with the spreadsheet of vocabulary. If you have any questions while joining us live on Zoom, please write it in the Q&A regarding this specific class. Any other questions, comments, concerns, requests for topics, please write it in the chat. Only write about this specific class I'm about to start in the Q&A. And let's get started. So I said last week we would talk about food, and we are going to talk about food, but we're going to talk about it in the context of our next big upcoming holiday this week, Shavuot. Shavuot is, we've covered it in the past and we will cover it in the future again. And this class is going to cover a couple different topics at once, and again, maybe show a clip if we have enough time of why Shavuot has become a uniquely Israeli holiday, or at least the way we celebrate in Israel can be markedly different from those of you who celebrated abroad or have celebrated abroad, or you've certainly noticed ways that you celebrated abroad that are very much part of Israeli culture. And this is a great example of a moment of creating something uniquely Israeli, which is inherently Jewish at the same time. So with that, I'm going to share the screen. The vocab for today, as always, you're welcome to screenshot it, pen and paper, or just follow along and you will get the spreadsheet as well coming up. So hold on just a second. Let me share that. Okay, view full screen. So top of the screen, as I said, Shavuot is in the middle, English, a transliteration on the right, English on the left, and we're going to go through this. We're not just going through the list, go through some annotations and understanding of it. So Shavuot. Shavuot is the name of the holiday. It literally means weeks, W-E-E-K-S. Shavua is 1 week, Shavuot are weeks. Despite its ending, the ot at the end of the word, indicating it's plural, it is a masculine word. Shavua, as in Shavua Tov, is a masculine word. Shavuot is the plural. If you'd like to learn more about exceptions to the rule when it comes to plurals, check on youtube.com. We have a whole lesson about it. So Shavuot is the name of it. Why is it called Shavuot? It's the festival of weeks because it is the count up, or rather the countdown that we started at the beginning of Pesach, those 7 weeks that were commanded in the Tanakh, in the Bible, to count from the Exodus, from leaving Egypt to the receiving the Torah at Al Sinai. It also is the time in which the barley harvest ripens in the land of Israel. And you're going to see that just like with all of our 2 other pilgrimage holidays, Pesach and Sukkot, they have to do with historical moments as well as agricultural moments. Shavuot being especially unique in that Pesach and Shavuot begin on the full moon. We know so because it begins on the 15th of the month, and the 15th of any Jewish month is a full moon. The first is a new moon. Shavuot does not. It has to be counted those 7 weeks after Pesach begins, and that's how we arrive at this date of Shavuot, which begins this year, this coming Thursday night. Here in Israel, it is 1 day. Elsewhere in the world, it is 2 days. It also falls over either ends right before Shabbat or continues through Shabbat, depending on where you are in the world. Shavuot is one of the names. It has a couple other names, this holiday, that give you more of a sense of what it means today as well as historically. The second one, Chag Matan Torah, right? Tradition tells us this is the day that Moshe, received the Torah on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai. Another name for the holiday is Chag HaMayim. We've already stopped praying for rain, but water is always important to us, especially in the land of Israel. There are many different traditions associated with water and Shavuot, but the ones I want to focus on specifically with regards to Israel and Israeli society in modern Hebrew are the next two. Chag HaKatzir and Chag HaBikurim, rows 5 and 6. Okay. Chag HaKatzir. Katzir or Katzir, depending on how you say it, the letter Resh, you can say Katzir, 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 has the root Kuf Tzadi Resh. And we always talk about Shorashim, the roots of words, the 3 letters, usually 3 letters, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, that make up all words in Hebrew. This has something to do with cutting, right? Liktzor is to cut. Katzar is short. Katzir is one of the many words we have in Hebrew that have to do with a specific type of harvest. In this case, katzir is harvesting grain, right? The idea that you are cutting grain that has fully matured and the seeds are ready to be extracted from the plant and from the husk. And that's exactly what we talked about before. Those counting of the weeks, what we in Hebrew we call Sfirat HaOmer. Omer is not just the name of that period that we've been counting from Pesach to Shavuot. Omer refers to the green barley, the young barley that's yet to ripen, that was given as an offering at the temple during this period. Katzir is any harvest that has to do with grain. So it's not just barley, which is what we're specifically talking about here. It can be wheat, it can be oats, all the other ones that are grown historically in the land of Israel, as well as to this day. Okay, and the other one, because remember what I just said about the omel, that green, young barley, the other name for this holiday, and this is why it becomes uniquely Israeli in modern history, is Chag HaBikurim. Chag HaBikurim is best translated as Festival of the First Fruits, because again, one of the things that was done when the temple still existed, both temples in Jerusalem, you would give your first fruits. If you were a farmer, you worked in agriculture, you would give the first fruits of your crop as they started becoming ripe this time of year. We've covered fruits and vegetables before in the seasons that they're grown in Israel, they ripen in Israel. Chag HaBikurim is one of the other classic names of Shavuot, and that's going to come up again and again in what we do. Okay, to go back to Katzil, and we've talked about this before, but it's always worth mentioning again to emphasize the agricultural aspect of this holiday, not just the historical religious parts with regarding to Matan Torah, giving the Torah. We've gone through these words before, they're worth going over again, and this gets into what I alluded to a little bit before. Katzil, we just talked about the harvest of grain in particular, and that's what we call it in Israel. When you are going out to harvest grain, it is called katzir. When you are harvesting specifically grapes, it's called batzir, right? A lot of these have to do with what we call the Shivat Haminim, the 7 species that according to Torah, God promises will grow in abundance in Israel so long as the Israelites keep to their covenant, right? And so a lot of these deal with specific fruits or general families of fruits and vegetables. So Batzil is grapes. This takes place later in the summer in the land of Israel when we harvest. Specifically, this word Batzil is just for grapes. The next one, Masik, is specifically for olives. That takes place in usually November through January in Israel. Katif is the harvest of any tree fruits. So citrus, apples, pomegranates, anything that grows on a tree. And finally, asif. Asif is a general term for harvesting, but also specifically for vegetables. So things that grow in the ground, but just a general term for harvest. Okay, to go back to that other term, bikurim. why this is so important. So this word bikurim, it means first fruits, and we can use it literally as first fruits. We can also use it in a more metaphorical context. The first fruits of their company, the first fruits of their building, whatever it may be, is the word bikurim. From that same root of bet chaf resh, we get the words, as you see here, bechor, firstborn, right? We also get the term bechorah, premiere. And we've talked about this word before. Hakranat bechorah is a premiere screening, right? Right now, or just ended, was Doc Aviv, Tel Aviv's annual documentary film festival, where a lot of premiere screenings take place. Hakranot bechorah. Premiere screenings. The Jerusalem Film Festival is in another month or so. Again, there usually will be a Hakranat Bechorah, a premiere screening of films, but Bechorah can be for anything. It just comes from that same shoresh, that same root of Bet Chaf Resh. Some of the things that have become unique to celebrating Shavuot, particularly in Israel, have to do with the kibbutz, ha-kibbutz. Remember, the kibbutz grew out of the ideology that some Zionist movements had at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th, socialism and Zionism and communism combining with Zionism, but also the realities on the ground in the land of Israel needing to be as self-sustained as possible, owing to the geopolitical realities, the harsh terrain, the harsh neighbors, and so forth. So they needed, the kibbutz was a model of living that afforded the earliest Zionist pioneers to live together, to work together, and to create their own microcosm, their own little entity, while the Zionist dream was being enlarged. So you had many different kibbutzim. It never grew to be a substantial population, but in terms of land use, in terms of influence on Israeli culture, on society, on politics, it had a huge, huge influence. And if we have time in a little bit, I'm going to show you a clip from a great documentary simply called Ha-Kibbutz, that explains. It's a great 4-part series. It currently only is in Hebrew with Hebrew subtitles, but I'm sure there's a version with English subtitles out there. It was produced about 10 years ago. We'll get into that in a little second. One of the things they talk about, and I'm going to show you in this clip, is reinventing or reconnecting with Jewish identity through the land. Because remember, for 2,000 years, Jews were not only, there were Jews living in the land of Israel, but not as a majority. And also in many places that Jews lived, they weren't able to use the ground. They weren't able to cultivate, to be farmers like they were in the land of Israel. Those of you who are more religiously minded, you know that many of the mitzvot have to do with the land and tilling the land and growing and farming the land. And thus a lot of it was reconnecting through the kibbutz movement, which was all about cultivating the land in very strategic parts of the country. So one of the things they did, Shavuot became a really big deal on a kibbutz. It's one of the biggest holidays even to this day. If you just type in kibbutz Shavuot in Hebrew or in English on YouTube, you'll see clips from all sorts of kibbutzim throughout the years having huge, big productions. And that filtered into everyday Israeli life wherever you are in the world. Some of the things you'll see are shibolet or shibolim. Shibolet is an ear of grain, right? It's think of the top of a stalk of wheat or barley or oats where the seeds are and those little feathery tails are. And shibolim is the plural, right? From that we get shibolet shual, the word we use in modern Hebrew for oats. But shibolet is any kind of grain. And we call that the ears of the grain. And shibolim is the plural of it. And so if you drive through Israel at this time of year, you will see many fields, golden fields full of shibolim, of ripe grains with the ears coming out. One of the other things, especially if you have kids or grandkids in schools in Israel this time of year, you're asked by schools to bring in a teneh. Teneh is one of those words you never hear the rest of the year except for this week before Shavuot. Teneh is simply a sal. or salsela. Sal is a basket. Tene is a specific woven basket. And you're going to see why in a second. That's one of the classic things that you bring different fruits in to help celebrate at school or at a community center. And one of the other things you'll see many people wearing, whether they're on a kibbutz or in a city or anywhere else, is a zer larosh. Zer is a bouquet or a wreath, and rosh is your head. So like a head garland or a head wreath. What am I alluding to? So let me share with you a clip right now. It's only a few minutes. It's not like last week, 10 minutes. There's a longer version of this. I'm only showing you a few minutes. It's all in Hebrew. There are subtitles. I'm not expecting you to follow along with the Hebrew. I want you to watch what they are doing and wearing when they're celebrating Shavuot on these kibbutzim. Remember, these are secular kibbutzim. We're not even in the phenomenon yet of religious kibbutzim. These are Jews who are trying to reconnect with their Jewish identity through Zionism and through cultivating the land and celebrating Shavuot in a way that makes sense for them as newfound farmers on the land. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of it, and I'm going to translate it afterwards. Okay, let me just share that with you. Optimize for video clip. Okay, we're only going to watch a few minutes of it, but I want to show you a little bit from this documentary.
הקיבוצים האלה מנחילים משהו לתרבות הישראלית בכלל, בטח לא ברמת הלחן. יש שירים כן, אני חושב שנדמה לי שעבדים היינו למשל. מפה. עבדים היינו. זה שומעים היום תמיד לקראת פסח ברדיו.
זה שלום פוסטולסקי מחג הפסח של עין חרוד. עבדים היינו שכולנו שרים וחושבים שזה היה מפולין מהמאה ה-17. מעין חרוד משנות ה-20. באותו דבר.
What they're talking about here, I'm just pausing it to give you context. They're talking about how the kibbutz recreated new culture and new ways of connecting with Jewish identity. And they're talking about how during Pesach, Avadim Hayinu was created by a kibbutznik. The tune that we know and sing at the Passover Seder was in fact created by a kibbutznik who was, again, trying to reconnect with his Jewish identity. And that's where it leads into Shavuot that they're about to talk about. And so again, these two older members of a kibbutz are talking about celebrating Jewish holidays in a secular context on the kibbutz, and then it's followed with archival footage of celebrating Shavuot.
חלף הלך לו, ענן רקיע, חלף הלך לו. פני אדמה, באור חמה, שיבולים זקפו, ראשיהם בקמה. פני הרים זה אל זה ברמה, ישוררו. שלום שלום, הידד הידד, אביב היום.
עכשיו, זו דוגמה מצוינת לאיך, קודם כל שבועות זה גם החג, מתי זה נהיה החג? שבאים מהעיר לראות ביקורים בקיבוץ.
זה הרבה שנים, וזה מעניין שזאת העלייה לרגל החדשה.
ענה הגשם, הלך הלך לו, ענן רקיע, הלך הלך לו, בני אדמה, באור חמה,
מה היה הטקס כאן בעמק? מכנסים את כל הענפים, מביאים את התוצרת שלהם ומתכנסים למקום מרכזי, נותנים את זה לפקיד של קרן הקיימת שהוא פודה את היבול הזה, ובכסף הזה, בעשירית, בעשר שלוקחים מהיבול הזה, בזה קונים עוד אדמה.
היות ואין בית מקדש, אז המבנה אומר, מה זה התחליף של בית המקדש? זה הקרן הקיימת לישראל, שהיא היום גאלה את האדמות מחדש, ואת מה שאני מביא, במקום להביא לבית המקדש, אני מביא, תורם את זה לקרן הקיימת לישראל.
ללאום.
ללאום, כן? האדמת הלאום שמוחכרת לנו, כדי שאנחנו, חס ושלום, לא רכוש פרטי שלנו. אנחנו לא קרישי נדל"ן, אנחנו קיבלנו את זה מהלאום כדי להוציא לחם מן הארץ, אז אנחנו נותנים את הפרי הזה ללאום.
הקיבוץ היה בו באמת איזה מין...
Okay, it keeps going. It's a wonderful documentary. I highly recommend it. It's available on YouTube, all 4 chapters. Unfortunately, it is it's all in Hebrew, but it has subtitles. So if you really want to practice your Hebrew, I highly recommend it. It's also absolutely beautiful in terms of the coverage. But what are they talking about? They're talking about creating something new out of their new reality, but also the traditions they grew up with themselves. They may not necessarily be religiously observant. And one of them that they were talking about on the was this idea of bikurim, of bringing the first fruits, of gathering the first fruits together, and instead of bringing them to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, as he said, who did they bring them to? They brought them to Kakal, Keren HaKayemet LeYisrael, the JNF, right, who had purchased the land that many, if not all, the kibbutzim sat on. And they were the ones who were redeeming it, right? And they even used the language that those mitzvot about tilling the land and redeeming it and bringing the tithings of your first of it, right? They said the 10%, the 10th of it, the asirit, or in the Bible it says ma'aser, right? Again, what we would normally ascribe to being just secular people are anything but, because they're reinventing and reconnecting with Jewish identity through a holiday that is very much about the harvest. And here they are dressed in white in the fields of Shibolim, as you saw, bringing the first fruits to be redeemed. It was symbolic for sure, but it was reconnecting with the land, reconnecting with their traditions in a very unique, special way that, number one, you will see on kibbutzim to this day, and it is very popular among some Israelis to go visit kibbutzim that have big festivals and big celebrations doing the exact same thing or similar things to it, with tractors and cherry pickers and things like that. But you'll also, like I said, see it in urban settings. Kids and grandkids being asked to bring in a tenne and a zer larosh to school, even if they have nothing to do with our agriculture, whether it's here in Tel Aviv or in Yerushalayim or elsewhere in the country. Right. Let's get to some other words with Shavuot. Another big part of Shavuot is it is affiliated with dairy foods, right? Dairy food is a big deal for Shavuot. There are all sorts of traditions as to why. I'm not going to go into them except to say 2 things. One is Jews throughout history, having done a bit of history of research on this myself, Jews throughout history have primarily been eating dairy. It was usually far too expensive to slaughter meat. It was much more profitable and cheaper to have a dairy-based meal. To have a meat-based meal is only very recent history, modern Jewish history. And also, Israelis love dairy products. We love our dairy products throughout things. Opening up this little bit about dairy products with an important word, pikuach. You've probably heard this word used in the last month a lot. It's a very important word when we talk about yoker mechia, the rising cost of life in Israel. Certain dairy products are under what we call pikuach or pikuach memshalti, which is that the government controls the price at which certain dairy products are sold, usually the ones that are based off of raw milk. If you are interested in that, I'll send that link along with this spreadsheet, but it's been in the news for quite some time now. Those who are already living in Israel know about that. And I'll give you the list of the specific products that are under pikuach. They have to be, the milk has to be produced in Israel for it to be considered under that. And it's very specific types of milk products. I'm not going to go into it just at the moment. If someone has a question about that, I can get to that in the Q&A once I'm done. Anyways, really basic words about dairy products, because that's what everyone is raving about, figuring out what they're going to make this week. If they eat dairy products, some don't. Those of you who don't, or just show that up to the screen to make sure that everyone does. Those of you who don't know what this is your friend in Israel. Whether you eat dairy products or not, know that we do indeed have lactose pills in Israel. Lactaid is an American company. This is one that's produced by Altman. It's called Lactazine. So if anyone is of that need, as most people in the world are in fact unable to digest lactose, these are your friends for the next few days here in Israel, should you eat dairy products for it. But let's go to some words associated with dairy products in Israel that we use throughout the year, not just for Shavuot. So chalav is milk. Chalavi is dairy. We've talked about this a lot. Hebrew is a great generator of new words. And one of those ways we can change a word into an adjective is simply adding the letter yud at the end, right? To get the masculine adjective of it. Chalavi comes from chalav, therefore milk-like or milk-ish is dairy. Okay, so chalavi means dairy. Chalavi, chalavit, chalavim, chalaviot. Okay, we conjugate it just like any other adjective. We take the noun, we add a yud to it, it becomes an adjective, conjugated accordingly based on what noun it's modifying. In slang, it's written here on the left, chalavi means boring. It's a very slang term, but it's very much white, correct? Think of it as the color white, as just being bland. Dairy is not necessarily bland, but that's a slang term in modern Hebrew. To call something chalavi, it can mean bland, not just boring, rather, not just dairy. From the same root, that chet lamed bet, which has to do with milk, milking also, we get the word chelbon. Chelbon, protein. We've talked about this word when we've gone through nutritional labels in the past. Here's where it comes from, right? Because again, the major source of protein for the Israelites and then the Jews for thousands of years was not meat, folks. It was dairy. Therefore, the word for protein in Hebrew comes from the same root as the word for milk and dairy. Sorry, not sorry if that busts some of your myths out there, but yes, indeed, we ate a lot of dairy throughout the years. I mean, I've been able to digest it, but such was life. Okay, some other words we get that have to do with Shavuot. Gvina. Gvina is cheese in a very general sense, right? It can be kasha, as we see in row 26. Gvina kasha is a hard cheese, or it can be gvina raka, a soft cheese, literally a tender cheese. Rach can mean soft, it can mean tender. Gil harach, a tender age, means young kids, right? We call that like first age. Hagil harach, tender, at a tender age. But gvina is any kind of cheese. It's not necessarily kasha or raka, it's just the general term for it. And then if you were saying a specific type of cheese, right? Like you wanted a specific, not just hard or soft, but a specific name applied to it, you would say gvinat, followed by the name of it. So gvinat parmesan, Parmesan cheese. Gvinat brie, brie cheese, and so forth. Okay, some other dairy products you may have heard of. These two are somewhat confusing to someone who isn't used to Israeli dairy products. Leben and labane. They sound similar. They're usually right next to each other in the dairy aisle. They are not the same thing. Leben is usually more liquidy and thin. It has a taste, it's usually more sour than labane. Leben is best thought of as a form of buttermilk. It's not exactly buttermilk, but it's not exactly, excuse me, labane, which we'll get to in a second, which is made from yogurt. Leben is often sold under the trademark names Eshel or Gil. Those correspond to the amount of fat that's found in the Leben. One is 3%, one is 4.5%. I don't remember. Both of them those are trademark names of Tnuva. Think of Eshel and Gil like Kleenex or Xerox, right? They are terms that are ultimately brand names that have become sort of generalized for that type of product. Most people won't ask, for example, for Leben, they'll ask for Eshel, right? People know of Eshel as this form of Leben with a certain type of fat content, not necessarily asking for Leben. Labane, however, by the way, Leben is also one of those dairy products that's under the pikuach, the government price control. This comes back from the days of austerity in Israel. The first decade of Israel was known as a period of tzena, austerity, where food was rationed because of an overall almost an entire global embargo on Israel. Certain foods were very difficult to procure, let alone distribute to the growing population. Leben was one of those that still remains a product that's under pikuach to this day. Labane, however, labane we also know as Greek yogurt. It is yogurt that has been further sieved or strained from the whey in it, so it's thicker. That's become very popular over the years in Israel, whether we call it Greek yogurt, whether we call it labane, and it's either made by Jews or Arabs and sold in all sorts of different ways. It's very popular this time of year, but it is different than Leben. Okay, a really important root here, another shoresh that tells us a lot about dairy products is shin mem nun. Okay, shin mem nun has to do with, not always, but it has to do something with oil and fat, because this can be talked about animal fat. We're only talking about dairy products right now. Shamenet is cream. Okay, shamenet is, again, like gvina. You can add all sorts of things to it to make it specific that I don't need to write out here. So for example, sour cream is literally sour cream. Shamenet chamutza. Chamutza is the adjective sour. Shamenet metuka. Metuka is sweet. Sweet cream is also known as double cream in Israel, or whipping cream. If you are looking for that, that's what you're going to look for, either shamenet metuka, or we'll get to the other word that can also mean whipping cream, and is in Hebrew literally means whipping cream. From the same root, we get the word shemen. It's a pretty well-known word, shemen, like shemen zait, olive oil, but shemen is any kind of oil, regardless of its origin. Okay. Two words that sound familiar that in English we would translate the same way, but very important. One's an adjective, one's a noun. Shamen is fat, adjective. Okay. Hu shamen, he is fat. Okay. Adjective is shamen, but fat as a noun, the amount of fat in a product is shuman. Okay. And again, shuman can be animal, plant, dairy, it doesn't matter. These are all, this root can refer to, again, dairy or animal fat or oil. Shuman is fat as in the amount of fat of something or in something, okay? And if we've already talked about adjectives and nouns, now we get to a verb, mashmin. It's also an adjective, mashmin, if something is fattening, right? Davar hazeh hu mashmin. That thing is really fattening, as in it makes you fat. But it can also be a verb. We've talked about this with participles. Here is a great participle. Mashmin is both an adjective, something that makes you fat, but lehashmin, which is just another conjugation of this word, is to become fat or to fatten up, right? So if you want to say nicely to someone, or perhaps not nicely to someone, hishmanta, to a man, it means you got fat or you got bigger. Literally, you got fat. Or lo hishmanta, you didn't get fat. Okay, so we get a huge amount of words from this one root, and even from this one word mashmin, whether it's a participle or as an adjective or participle as a verb, we get a lot out of it. Finally, in this, I referred to Leben before as a type of buttermilk. If you're looking for proper buttermilk in Israel, it's often called chuvtza, but it's also known by its company brand name. The one that's made by Tnuva, which is Israel's largest dairy provider, is Rivion. The one made by Tara is called Rivia. Very similar, but that's buttermilk and it's sold in a carton. So you know that it's liquid, as opposed to Leben, which often has some solids still in it, milk solids. Okay, some words that go with milk, because this is the 21st century. We have a lot of different options for our milk and dairy products here in Israel. Muashar. Muashar comes from the same root as ashir, rich. Ain shin resh has something to do with being rich or richness. Muashar is the causative form, right? To become rich, or as we would say in English, enriched. Okay, so anything that is muashal is enriched. It could be enriched with vitaminim, with vitamins, mineralim, minerals, or anything else. But enriched, a lot of milk in Israel, if it's not under pikuach, will often be enriched with extra vitamin D, or sidan, calcium. We've talked about those words before, but just know that's what the word means, enriched, if you see it on a dairy product label. Other important words to know, dal. Talked about this word before. Dal usually means low hyphen, right? So if you see, connecting with the word we just had, shuman, right? If you see a milk bottle labeled chalav dal shuman, let's connect all the words we just had. Chalav, we had milk. Dal, we just talked about low. Shuman, fat. Low fat milk. Chalav, dal, shuman. Simple as that. You'll often hear people when they order their coffee at a Beitz Cafe, at a cafe, and they want to get a cafe hafuch, our version of a latte in Israel, and they simply say hafuch dal. That's all they'll say. Hafuch dal, or efshar hafuch dal. They want a low-fat cafe latte. Sometimes many cafes will simply say they don't have dal, in which case you have to get regular milk or something else. But just saying dal in the context of milk usually means low-fat. You can think of that as skim milk for those of you who know what that is, otherwise low-fat milk. And then we also have, apropos the lactose pills I showed you before, natul. Natul is a word that means de, like a prefix, or the suffix free. In this case, if you see something that says chalav natul lactose, or in this case that I'm thinking of in the dairy aisle in Israel, chalav natul lactose, lactose-free milk. You will also see, by the way, chalav dal lactose, low or a small amount of lactose milk, but you'll also see natul. Natul can be D, as it says here, D as a prefix or as a suffix free. So for example, if you want to order decaffeinated coffee for whatever reason that you have, trying not to judge here, natul caffeine, right? Just as natul lactose means lactose free, natul caffeine, caffeine free, decaf. Okay, natul can be used before any word that you're trying to say de or dash free. Since again, we're talking about milk products, we got to talk about this one, simchi or min hatzomeach, plant-based. Anytime you see the words simchi or min hatzomeach referring to anything, it doesn't just have to be dairy products. It could be, in Israel, for example, we are really into schnitzel min hatzomeach. Schnitzel min hatzomeach, a plant-based schnitzel. It can either be soy, it could be corn, it could be all sorts of different things. The point though is, those of you who are looking for plant-based milk, you're going to look for chalav simchi or chalav min hatzomeach, and then it will list what it's made out of. It could be soya, soy, it could be shkedim, almonds, it could be oleh, rice, and so forth. Okay, but this is what you're going to look for as a plant-based alternative. Also, by the way, this comes into shamenet. We have shamenet min hatzomeach in Israel, plant-based cream, many other dairy products that are made from plants. Okay, some other important words that have to do with Shavuot. This one is probably the most important, at least in my menu for the week. Ugat gvina. Ugat gvina cheesecake. It literally is uga, cake, gvina, cheese. You put the two words together, just like in English. By the way, this is a great example of how we make compound words in Hebrew, just like in English. Look at that word in English on the left-hand side of row 43, cheesecake. It's one word comprised of cheese and cake. Same thing in Hebrew, uga, cake, cheese, gvina. We put them together, literally the cake of cheese, ugat gvina, cheesecake. Now, What's important in Israel, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, is there are many different types of cheesecake in Israel. Some are good, some are not good, some are homemade, some are bought. Everyone has their own tradition. The proper cheesecake, as you're hearing from my accent, needs to have gvinat shamenet. Gvinat shamenet is cream cheese. Okay, if you are looking for cream cheese in signon Americai, our next word here down the list, 2 words down from ugat gvina, signon Americai, signon means style, Americai, American. It's important if you're going to make your own cheesecake, or if you want proper American style cream cheese and you can't find Philadelphia cream cheese in Israel, which by the way is much more available nowadays, or a knockoff brand in that classic block, but is still very much the same style of American style cream cheese, you want to look for gvinat shamenet besignon Americai, American style cream cheese. Okay. My opinion, that's the only proper kind of cheesecake. Happy to give out those recommendations if you need those places, but just know there are many different types of cheesecake. European style cheesecakes, those of you who've had them, are usually airier, they're fluffier. They're not the dense cream cheese based ones, the American style signon Americai. Another classic food eaten in Israel only this time of year are blinches. Blinches, and listen to how I'm saying it in modern Hebrew, folks. This is how you're going to hear it referred to and spelled if you want to go out and buy them or make them and need the different ingredients to make them, is blinches. Okay, blinches is how we say blintzes in modern Hebrew. People know what they are. Again, they're not consumed on a regular basis that perhaps you're more used to, but certainly around Shavuot, you'll see these offered in a lot of different places. In bakeries and different patisseries will also offer them, as well as in grocery stores. Another classic food that's eaten throughout the year, not just on Shavuot, but has to do with dairy food because it's often made dairy, is a pashtida. Row 48. Pashtida is best thought of as a crustless quiche. There's no crust, there's no puff pastry or anything like that. It's the eggs and any of the filling you have, and you basically bake it in a dish, Pyrex dish, whatever kind of dish you want. It's very popular on Shabbat, but it's also very popular on Shavuot. You'll see all sorts of people offering quiches, but also pashtedot. Pashteda is usually something you make at home. Because it's so simple to make. It's just eggs with another ingredient baked like a casserole in the oven, rather than like an omelet or a frittata on the stove. But you will see people typically make these for Shavuot. Again, those who are eating dairy on this holiday, this is a classic one because you can add all sorts of different spring vegetables and dairy products in it. Eggs are integral part of a pashteda, beitza. Beitzim is the plural of beitza, which is a feminine word. It is not beitzot, it is beitzim. A classic thing that's also often added to a pashtida is kemach tofeach. Kemach tofeach is self-raising flour. This may be new to some of you. Self-raising flour is simply flour, all-purpose flour that has some baking powder in it, as well as sometimes some yeast in it. It'll have on the ingredients list what's in it, but often pashtida can be as simple as beitzim and kemach tofeach, eggs and self-raising flour. You can add all sorts of things to it. A classic one is afunot or afunat gina, garden peas. There are countless recipes online for pashtedot, as well as for all sorts of other things to make on Shavuot. Instead of taking you through a recipe, because recipes can be easily translated and found in English, I just want to go through some of the words, not just for pashtida, but could also be for making your own ugat gvina that you're going to see again and again in recipes for Shavuot and throughout the year. This one I alluded to before, lahakpitz. Lahakpitz comes from the same root, kuf pe tzadi, as to jump, likfotz. Right? Lahakpitz, to cause to jump. In this context, to cause something to jump, to saute. Right? Whenever you are putting something in a hot pan and moving it around, sauteing, is lahakpitz. This is the verb we also use for stir frying, whether it's Asian food, like in a wok, or sauteing, like in more European style. Lahakpitz is the verb we use. This is also the verb we use also to whip things, as in like whipping cream. So if you're looking for whipping cream, you're going to put these two words together. Shamenet is cream, right? We had that word up here before. Where'd you go? Shamenet. The label is going to say shamenet lehakpatsa. It's going to take the verbal noun of lahakpitz, lehakpatsa. So whipping cream. Cream for whipping, literally is how you would translate it, is whipped cream in Israel. It comes in a little container for you to whip on your own. Okay. Two other verbs, and then I want to get to some questions. As I see, we have a bunch of them in the Q&A. Le'arbev is to mix. Can mix anything, but especially when you're talking about a recipe. And finally, because we do a lot of this on Shavuot, even though it's getting warm out, and it may be warm in your kitchen, especially this time of year, is le'efot. Le'efot is to bake. Okay, that can be savory and sweet things. That can be dessert. That can also be whole meals. But le'efot is to bake, right? Ma'afia is a bakery, the place that bakes. This is just a sample of words for Shavuot. If you have any specific questions about Shavuot or the words we're going through, now's your chance to write them in the Q&A. If you haven't already, let me stop here and start going through some of those or questions you have. Q&A. Could one define shibolet as sheaf as opposed to an ear as an oats, shibolet shual? Yes, that's absolutely true. They can be also defined as a sheaf, but it's also the ear of something. We also use that term for corn. The ears of corn is also shibolet. It's sort of a catch-all general term for these type of grain things. Okay. Is shibolet masculine or feminine? Let me just double check. I believe I wrote that in here. I did not write it in here. Shibolet, I believe, is feminine, even though it has the ending im in plural. Okay, shibolet, shibolim is the plural, but it is feminine. This isn't a word come across often, but yes, it is, as far as I remember, it is a feminine word. Yes, we'll give you the link to the documentary on YouTube. No problem with that, and a few other extra bonus links in the follow-up email, as well as in the description of this video, which will go up on YouTube the next day or two. I see a lot of people asking about the documentary. Don't worry, folks. We will send out the link to you with the English, in English, but it is in Hebrew. I'll make sure that you understand whether it has Hebrew subtitles or not, but we will say, I will send out that documentary. No problem. Great question. What is the connection between pikuach, as in government price control, and pikuach nefesh? So pikuach comes from the verb lefakeach over here, which means to, we can think of it as pikuach nefesh as saving the soul, in that lefakeach is to supervise, right? So we're supervising over the soul. Pikuach nefesh is an important concept in Jewish tradition and Jewish law. The saving of someone's life, as it says in Talmud, pikuach nefesh dochet Shabbat, that the saving of someone's life overrides Shabbat, therefore all halachot, any Jewish religious laws. The idea of it supervising. Lefakeach means to supervise, to watch over, to administer to is another way to think about the word pikuach, is the best way to think about it. Great question. Someone has a question about the word katif. Katif comes from the verb liktof. Liktof is to pick, as in pick fruits off a tree. Tree fruits, as it says here, tree fruits. Anything that, a fruit that grows on a tree. Okay, that's the word katif. We use that word specifically harvesting fruits from a tree. Apples, citrus, pomegranates, figs, so forth. I've heard the term parve used to denote boring, uncontroversial. Is that used as well? Great question. Those of you who know a little bit of Jewish dietary laws, you know that there's chalavi, as we talked about before, dairy, basari, meat-based, and then parve, the third, which is neither milk or meat. Doesn't mean it's vegetarian or vegan, but it is neither milk or meat. In modern Hebrew, we say parve. That can also mean boring or uncontroversial, but chalavi also means the same sort of boring, nothing fancy. Someone asked for sour cream and cream cheese. We talked about both of them. Sour cream is literally sour cream. Shamenet, cream, chamutza, sour. And cream cheese we talked about already. All right. Gvinat shamenet, done. Fresh cheese counters have different blocks of cheese, all called shamenet. What is this? Great question. So in Israel, we have a lot of different kinds of gvinot shamenet that aren't just signon americai, American style. We have all sorts of spreadable ones. You may have heard of those. Some of them are called ski or symphonia with all sorts of different flavors added to it. We also have different types of various different kinds of cheese that you may not be familiar with. This is a great opportunity this holiday coming up to acquaint yourself with different cheeses. And a lot of them are based on how much shuman is in them, how much fat is in them, as well as how much cream, shamenet, is in them, all sorts of different kinds. Someone asked, what about goat milk? Pretty easy, folks. I'm not going to write out everything here because if you're able to figure it out on your own, this is a great one. Goat milk, very simple. Milk is chalav, izim, or goats. Chalav, izim, milk of goats. Okay, chalav, izim, goat milk. Usually we'll have a goat on the label for those who are looking for goat milk. Someone asks, what is the equivalent of semi-skimmed or full-fat milk? We don't have those delineations in English. All you're going to look for is what percentage is listed after the word shuman, right? Where's that word shuman we just talked about? If you look at a label of any dairy product, it will say shuman followed by the percent sign. So it might be or either preceding it or after the word shuman. It might be 3% shuman, 3% fat. It could be 1.5% shuman, fat 1.5%. When we don't have the words like in English, whether it's American English or British English, like semi-skim or full fat. Those words don't exist in English, in Hebrew, excuse me. They just have the percentage of the dairy fat that's still in it, the butter fat, excuse me. Someone asks, does the problem with milk apply to goat milk? I don't know what you're referring to. If you'd like to further specify in the Q&A, that would be helpful to answer that. Someone asks, what is the difference between pashtida and kugel? Great question. Pashtida is usually only beitzim, eggs, and some sort of kemach, flour, and then some sort of additive. Kugel, also pronounced in modern Hebrew in Israel as kigel. So if you hear kigel, it also refers to kugel, is typically made with noodles or shredded vegetables. It can be sweet, it can be savory. It's a very different constellation of ingredients. They're both usually cooked in the same way in some sort of casserole dish or loaf tray, but they have different origins. Kugel actually comes from the tradition of Shabbat and cooking something like a dumpling inside your cholent. All Jewish communities around the world, whether it's Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Mediterranean, Middle East, have some sort of Shabbat stew. It's not necessarily called cholent like it is in Eastern Europe. It's sometimes called chamin or dafina or tabit. And usually in addition, there was some sort of thing added to it. That's where at least the Ashkenazi tradition of a kugel comes from. It was a dumpling that turned into something that was cooked inside another container in the cholent that then became its own dish. There are many different kinds, but kugel usually contains egg, whereas pashteda, the main ingredient is egg. Great culinary question. I see we're getting a couple admin questions. Again, folks, if you are not getting the follow-up email, please either go to youtube.com for the recording of the video or email us. Just email us directly, Hebrew, Hebrew, at nbn.org.il. The link is in the chat box right now, if that's too much to follow, but it's simply Hebrew at nbn.org.il. Please email us directly if you're having any issues getting our emails. If you've unsubscribed to us in the past and resubscribed, that could be why you're not getting it. That usually indicates there might be a potential spam issue involved. Please just email us directly if you have an issue getting our emails. That's the best way for us to handle that. Someone wrote a very cute. My lactose-free milk says on the label, Ani netulat da'agot. That's very cute. I'd love to see a picture of that. That literally means I am without worries. Ani, netula is from that word natul before we had, right? Means di or free, meaning without or free of. Da'agot. Da'agot are worries or concerns. Right? So if it's lactose free, you have no concerns whatsoever of digesting that. That's a great label on your lactose free milk. Thanks for that. Someone is asking about yogurt versus pudding. Yogurt, I didn't include it on this list. You can simply look it up or just know that we say yogurt in Hebrew, yogurt. Simple as that. Pudding is all sorts of different kinds. Usually it's simply called a ma'adan, but it can be all sorts of different types of things. We don't have a catch-all word for pudding because there are many different labels and brands of what would constitute as pudding for people in the dairy aisle. Goat milk was referring something about a rising cost government issue. I'm not sure. Great question. I will send you the list of things that are under pikuach. Goat milk is not one of them. Think, folks, basic food items that are subsidized by the government, not things that are beyond mainstream consumption. Goat milk is definitely not one of those things. Cow milk is included in that, right? Cows produce much more milk. We have a huge cow dairy industry in Israel. That's one of the things included. I am happy to send you that list in English of all the things that are under price control, but you see it at the grocery store. If it's not labeled as such, you certainly see the price difference. How would you wish someone a happy vegan Shavuot? How would you? First off, Shavuot, like the other pilgrimage holidays, you can simply say Chag Sameach. You can also say Chag Shavuot Sameach, or any of these other terms we have up here. You could say Chag Shavuot Sameach, Chag Matan Torah Sameach, Chag HaMaim Sameach, Chag HaKatzil Sameach, Chag HaBikurim Sameach, however you want to say it. If you want to wish someone a happy vegan Shavuot, God bless you, vegans. Love you. Keeping us healthy and thinking about our food, where it's coming from. Chag Tivoni Sameach. We've talked about this before. The word for vegan in Hebrew is Tivoni. You can look at this up in any dictionary. I promise it's there. Tivoni is vegan. Simchoni is vegetarian. Chag Tivoni would be a vegan holiday. A happy vegan holiday would be Chag Tivoni Sameach. A happy vegetarian holiday, Chag Simchoni Sameach. The rest of you can be simply a Chag Sameach. Okay. Okay, we need to stop here on. Fortunately, I see we have a couple other questions coming in, but we do need to stop for time. Toda rabah. Thank you all so much for joining. Like I said, you will receive a copy of this recording, as well as the spreadsheet, as well as the links of the video we watched in particular and a few others in the follow-up email. It will also be in the description on YouTube in the next day or two, certainly ahead of the holiday of Shavuot starting, so you can be prepared accordingly. And until next week, Litaot, take care, and more importantly, Chag Sameach. Have a great, happy, healthy, delicious Shavuot ahead. Take care.